Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today, we've got a list of Valentine's Day special for 2025. Many people have been haranguing me about not doing enough lists, doing individual reviews, which some people like the in-depth content. Most people like the list where you can talk about a lot of fragrances at once. And so I figured with Valentine's Day 2 weeks away, this would be a great opportunity for me to do one of these sort of semi-seasonal lists, but with Valentine's Day, of course, it's all about roses. So today, we're going to do a masculine rose video. Now, as my fragrance journey has continued, I've sort of broken the fragrance world down into three categories: designers, niche, and artisanal fragrances, okay? And so, true to form, in the last year or so, as I've been doing these lists, we're going to do 5 designers, 5 niche, and 5 artisanal fragrances. Now, keep in mind, not all of these are straight out and out rose scents, okay? So some of them are rose, even rose soliflores in some way. Others where you'll find where the rose is very, very prominent. And still others, the rose is maybe one small piece of a broader overall sort of composition by the perfumer. But this will be a fun list, I think, especially with Valentine's Day right around the corner. Some men struggle with rose, especially in the United States. A lot of times in the US, if you show somebody a rose-based fragrance, they instantly associate it with being feminine. And that's not the case. Not all of these are marketed towards men. Some of these are unisex. Some of them you may even consider to be feminine in one way or another. Just on the whole, it may lean slightly feminine. But these are fragrances that as a man, I would have absolutely no problem wearing on Valentine's Day. I think they would be sexy as hell. I think they would set you apart, especially if you're kind of dressed for success and you're properly dressed and you have the right attitude and, the proper manners and all that good stuff, right? So let's do this top 15. But first, I want to do Scent of the Day because today's Scent of the Day is a very special discontinued fragrance. And I have to give a special shout out to Angie, who I already had the EDT, which I purchased with my own money, but she very kindly sent me the aftershave. And so today, for the very first time, I had a fresh shave. Well, not shave for the first time, but for the first time, I had a fresh shave while using the aftershave. And this is Scott McClintock for men. This is what the packaging looks like. Very simple packaging from back in the day. This came out in 1992, but it's very interesting because, so I've got a, 13-hour dry down right here on my left hand. And I've got a fresh spray from probably about an hour ago on my right hand. And I'll tell you what, this fragrance transcends the decades because there are bits and pieces of it that remind me of Eau Sauvage from the 1960s, the original EDT. It has this sort of citrusy quality. There's a lot of citrus notes in here, but there's a big twist, okay? And the twist is that this is the only fragrance that I can really put my finger on that I know well that has a hard cider note. So I've talked a lot about liqueur notes on my channel, talked about things like rum and cognac being very, very popular. Sometimes you'll see something like a wine note. One of the Jinx fragrances I reviewed recently on the channel had a port wine type of accord, that kind of thing. I've even seen some beer, malty beer type notes in perfume before, but a hard cider note really sets this apart. And what's so interesting is it gives it the tiniest boozy quality, but more so it gives it this unbelievable crispness. When you drink like a hard cider and that very last sip at the end has this crisp feeling, like biting into the freshest, crispiest, if that's a word, apple, but just think about that crisp, that bite, that's what the hard cider does. But it's mixed with things like amber and spices and surprisingly this very powdery floral accord. And yet it comes across as very masculine because of that 1960s style sort of citrusy bit. And I'll tell you what, if you like fragrances like YSL Pour Homme from 71, if you like Eau Sauvage from 66, those type of citrus heavy masculine fragrances from way back in the day, Monsieur Givenchy, the original kind of masculine fragrances from back in the day when men weren't supposed to wear fragrance. It was supposed to be very, very light. A man didn't like to be called out for wearing fragrance back then. Check this out. This is an amazing fragrance that I will do a discontinued gem review one of these days. Scott McClintock for men. And I'll tell you what, being able to combine it with the aftershave. Here, let me show you the aftershave. And it actually wears really beautifully too. I put it on before I took a shower. So I shaved, took a shower, and I could just smell it you know, in the shower when the water touched my face, you know, it would just come to life. Really beautiful stuff, the aftershave mixed with the EDT. So thank you, Angie, for sending me the aftershave. Very, very kind of you. So that is my scent of the day for you vintage lovers. Okay, so let's do this top 15 rose fragrances for men for Valentine's Day. So the first one goes all the way back to 1973. So there's going to be a little bit of something for every single one in this video. For you vintage lovers, we're going to go all the way back to 1973. And we're going to talk about probably one of the greatest rose fragrances ever created, in my opinion, by Bernard Chant. And this is called Aramis 900. Actually, you know what? Why don't you let me get some strips so I can spray real quick. Sorry. I did not come prepared. Just a few. Just a few. I'm not going to spray that much. But this is one I do want to spray because if you've ever smelled Aromatics Elixir, it's very interesting to me how Bernard Chant loved playing, even back then, which was revolutionary. He would release a fragrance that was marketed towards women, like Aromatics Elixir. Then he would release a fragrance, sometimes just a couple years later, marketed towards men. And while they were different fragrances, they shared a lot of similarities. And he was almost like one of the first perfumers to really start playing with that idea of, well, I don't know if that's fair to say, but many people were not doing what he was doing at the time. I absolutely love this. I think you may have to be a little bit brave in 2025 to wear this because there is this sort of dirtiness, darkness to the rose. That is definitely a theme with many of the rose fragrances that I went for. Is this very dark, heavy, animalic rose almost, dirty, you know, dipped rose, dipped in, you know, this heavy, almost like tar-like substance. There's this blackness to it, you know? And underneath, it's got this old school, heavy, earthy patchouli with civet, animalic civet. And I'm guessing this could be called a sheep. I mean, he's the king of sheep rose. Bernard Chant is the king of sheep rose. So this could be called like a rose-heavy sheep, if you will. There's a couple on this list that fall into this category. But if you want an idea of the scent profile and you can't find a bottle of Aramis 900, this is a vintage bottle. The newer bottles just look like they're in the classic gentleman's collection. It's funny because for as long as people have been saying that this whole line is going to be discontinued, Parfumo still shows it's being marketed by Estee Lauder. So if that is true and Estee Lauder is still producing this, bravo to them for doing that. But yeah, this, I mean, you get little green touches here that are now coming through. I don't know where those green notes are coming from, but it's like, you know, like recreating the whole rose plant right in front of you. The thorns, the leaves, the green parts, the heavy, deep, dark rose. But animalic, that is the thing for 2025, is you may have to have some intestinal fortitude to wear that. But I think maybe not a good first date fragrance, but I do think it would be proper if you let's say know the girl, you've been going steady for a while, whatever you want to call it. You know, that Aramis 900 is absolutely stunning from 1973. Staying on that same theme, and maybe even I might go so far as to say this could even be inspired by Aramis 900. This is from 1978 now, so we stay in the 70s, but we jump to Van Cleef and Arpels Pour Homme, which they stupidly discontinued. Unfortunately, I don't know if I grabbed a backup bottle, because I've got 3 bottles of this, and I don't think this one has actually ever been sprayed. I think I grabbed a backup bottle, so who knows? Usually I like to save my backups unsprayed, but I'm going to go ahead and spray it. Screw it. So this is, it's interesting because this fragrance, yeah, instantly you get much more of this aromatic sort of combination of myrtle, sage, juniper, nutmeg, which you really don't get in Aramis 900. Aramis 900 brings out more of the sort of the rosewood and the coriander, and early on you get those kind of notes. Some of the green touches I mentioned earlier. Van Cleef and Arpels Pour Homme kind of merges the two, if you will. And so there's lavender in here, but what's crazy is that it really merges Aramis 900 with Chanel Antaeus to me. So you kind of get this I mean, how do you even describe the beauty of something like Antaeus? But I did try. Go check out my Antaeus review, if you will. But this spicy, leathery component starts to come in. And imagine mixing that. I truly believe that Antaeus was inspired by something like Van Cleef & Arpels Pour Homme. And if you can just imagine sort of the vintage notes in here from masculines gone past, the Artemisia and the myrtle, the clove, the spices mixed with that rose, and then coming into that leathery animalic part, it is absolutely stunning. One of my all-time favorites, probably my favorite Van Cleef & Arpels Pour Homme, or Van Cleef & Arpels fragrance. I really love SAR, but this is much more my personal speed. This type of leathery, spicy, animalic, smoky chypre. The first two are both chypre constructions, but the rose is pretty prominent, and it plays a similar role, this dark, mysterious, almost like dipped in tar, you know, black. Something someone like Tom Ford would understand. You know, he's named fragrances Noir de Noir, you know, this black image of the rose comes through in some of his scents over and over again. And you can see from the black bottle their kind of marketing scheme, and it's so perfect. I mean, some people say this is a gothic scent, it's a vampire scent. Don't believe any of that, but you do have to have some personality to pull this off, and you have to like some vintage old school fragrances. But Van Cleef & Arpels Pour Homme is, man, if I wasn't constantly wearing stuff that I plan on reviewing for the channel, you know, which to be fair, I love Scott McClintock for men, but I would definitely be wearing more of some of my all-time favorites like Van Cleef & Arpels Pour Homme. Okay, next on the list, I do not need to spray because I know it like the back of my hand. I also have 3 bottles of this, but I grabbed the small one for simplicity purposes. This is Davidoff Zeno. And this is another one where it's very complex. Now we're moving away from the chypre construction. We're moving more towards this sort of amber fougere, which I would almost make the case that even though this didn't really found the amber fougere genre, if you will, because I think it goes all the way back to early 70s. And I reviewed a fragrance called Pierre Cardin Pour Monsieur on the channel. You can check that out. I think that's one of the big bridges between the 50s and 60s all the way up to what ended up breaking out in the 1980s. Now, this fragrance is sort of like a blend of decades, very similar to what I was saying with Scott McClintock for Men when I was talking a little bit about how there's these different aspects throughout the decades. And I do think the best perfumers have the ability to grab things from the past, what works, and bring it all together. This is a Michel Almerac creation, who I think is one of the all-time great, you know, Mount Rushmore of perfumers, if you will. And Michel Almerac stated in an interview that the base of Guerlain Shalimar, with the sort of vanillic, you know, the tonka vanilla floral aspect of the Guerlainade, the spices, the ambery aspect, all that stuff that makes the Guerlainade is what inspired the base of Davidoff Zeno, okay? But he ended up sort of what I think is a precursor to something that Guerlain actually ended up putting out a couple years later, and it's a top 10 fragrance for me, which is Guerlain's Heritage. So it's interesting. It's like a inspiration from a Guerlain made a Davidoff, and then this set off a trend that ended up making a Guerlain. It's just weird how the pendulum kind of swings that way. And the bottle of Heritage actually is a pendulum. So put all that stuff together. But in a nutshell, this is also a very dark rose, woody and spicy. There is some beautiful lavender in here. I love the rosewood. Rosewood is such a beautiful note. And you notice it was used in Aramis 900, and it was used in Zeno Davidoff. Two out of the first 3 have that rosewood mixed with the rose. So you have the woodiness, which rosewood has this rosy smell anyway, this floral type woody smell anyways. But I love it because my mother used to have this rosary that was made out of rosewood from the Holy Land. And I remember her kind of forcing me to pray it every Easter at the time. So years went by where I had this memory of this rosewood smell over and over and over. But I love the smell of rosewood. And you mix it with the rose, and it really has this, Zeno for me, has this very outdoor feeling about it. You know, like you're walking up the side of a mountain or something, and you come across this rose that just feels like it is larger than all the other plants around it, you know, like it emits more of a smell, this dark rose. And I'm sure he's amplified it with geranium and some other things to kind of amp it up a little bit, to give it more of a spicy touch. And, you know, it smells like one rose in a field of sort of other flowers while you're walking up the mountain, but it just sticks out to you. Have you ever been on like a hiking trail and all of a sudden, even through all of the beauty of nature, one flower just stands out to you? You just have to go over to that one. That's how the rose feels in Zino Davidoff, but it's so classy, you know, with the old school lavender. If you like fragrances like Heritage by Guerlain, if you like the original Ungaro Pour L'Homme #1, if you like Etienne Eigner's Free Life, I would urge you to try something like this. So we're coming a little bit closer to modern times, but still 1986, my favorite decade, the 1980s. So continuing on the path of staying in the past for the designers, we will have one modern fragrance, but you can see all my favorite rose fragrances are in the past. This is from 1989, and this may be one of the best value for money discontinued fragrances you can buy. And this is called Acteur by the house of Azzaro, Loris Azzaro. And Pierre Denan, the great bottle creator, created this bottle. I did a whole Pierre Denan bottle extravaganza. You can check out his work. And I've done a couple actually fragrance bottle videos, if you will. But this is another dark rose, very spicy, green, floral, mixed with the twist here is they've mixed it with calamus and nutmeg and cardamom in the top, but that deep, dark, old school rose, which continues. You can really see the style of rose that I love in my first 4 picks. You know, they're all deep and dark, nothing fresh. That's coming later on once we get to some of the niche fragrances. But in the designer realm, you can see the old school style that I love, mixed with cedar wood. So it's very woody. There's a leathery note that starts to come through again. And I really feel like this was heavily inspired by Aramis 900 and Aromatics Elixir. If you like those type of fragrances, you will probably really like Aramis Actor. I'll do a full review on, I don't think I've reviewed any of these the 5 from the designers that we've talked about. Once we get to the niche, there have been reviews on the channel, but I'll go back and do some, you know, discontinued gem or even vintage Hall of Fame reviews. I think Van Cleef & Arpels Pour Homme would be a vintage Hall of Fame review, as would Zino Davidoff and Aramis 900. Probably Actor, because it followed in the footsteps, would be just a discontinued gem review. But I'll do full reviews on these one of these days. But definitely, you can still get these for very good prices on eBay. The price of Actor, for whatever reason, hasn't skyrocketed like some of the other discontinued fragrances. Sometimes that's just how it goes. There's some fragrances that just stick around at a reasonable price. The price just never jumps. It never gets hyped. And if you really want a true taste of the past, you can score a big bottle of this. I saw one of the big boys, like the 200 ml for like $100, $150 something. Very, very reasonable, especially when you consider that's a bottle of Sauvage nowadays. So yes, Azzaro Acteur from 1989. Okay, final designer fragrance, and now we're going to jump all the way to 2019, and this is a very floral, spicy blend from the house of Moschino. It actually did well enough to spur flankers. Part of that could be the bottle, part of it could be the scent. But this is created by Jan Vastnier, who I think is a pretty good perfumer in his own right. And this is called Toy Boy. You can see I scored a cheap tester from back in the day. You can get these testers for cheap sometimes, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Especially when you're a collector, sometimes you have to get what you can get, even if it's a, you know, bottle without a cap or a tester or whatever. Mine came with the stupid cap of the bear that always reminds me of that honey bear for some reason. There's a honey brand here in the US that does the bear, you know? So this always reminded me of that honey bear, but there's no honey in this. This is about sort of pear and elemi. So you get a little bit of smokiness, a little bit of fruitiness, and then mixed with rose and a lot of modern type chemical, well, synthetics, let's say. And that's what may put some people off of the scent. So there is amber max in here. There's cycolide, and there's cashmeran. Cashmeran gives it that sort of warm, as if you're being wrapped in a cashmere sweater. You know, it adds this unbelievable amount of warmth mixed with the rose. The rose is much, much fresher than the more vintage style roses that I discussed. It's mixed with flax blossom and magnolia, 2 floral notes that you rarely get in a designer like this, and some clove. And so it adds spiciness with the nutmeg and pink pepper, so you have a spicy rose. Really, really beautiful stuff. marketed towards men, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, marketed towards men, believe it or not. Even though it's a rose heavy scent, it's got that floral spiciness going on, but I think it's a beautiful rose for a designer. I can't remember what I paid for this, but I think it was like 40 bucks, you know, for 100 mils. Yeah, 100 mils. You know, they call it spicy, woody, ambery, and I would say that the rose in here is definitely the centerpiece of the show. And so if you are a rose lover, don't overlook it because of the tacky bottle, or don't give it bad points because of the tacky bottle. Toy Boy is definitely worth your time. It's one of the better, more modern creations from the brand. Moschino Toy from the late 80s is my all-time favorite, but those days are long gone. You know, the brands have kind of gone in a different direction. Okay, so that's the 5 designers. So let's go to the 5 niche fragrances now. So I tried to do all different brands too, so I tried not to repeat any brands. Once we got into the artisanal space, I had to repeat. Just couldn't help myself. I had to just go with the ones that were popped into my head first. So there is a repeat on the artisanal side, but on the designer and the niche side, we've got all different brands. So the first one on the niche side is probably one of my all-time favorite niche brands, Amage. I have put a ton of work individually reviewing many of the Amage fragrances. I only have, I want to say 3 or 4 left to do individual reviews on. There'll be a review of Bracken Man and Sunshine Man and Beach Hut Man coming up very, very soon. I think those are the 3 that we're still waiting on. But this one I actually reviewed in the last 2 or 3 months, and it's called Lyric Man. And Lyric Man is a 2008 release. It's one of the early releases from Christopher Chong's sort of reign over Amage, if you will. And it's still in production. It's one of the ones that stuck around even after the Fishman came on. And this is Bergamot Lime, which really makes this stand out. So I've got a full review if you really want to check out. Sorry, the fingerprints are driving me absolutely crazy. If you really would like to check out a deeper dive into the scent, go check out my individual review. But basically, it's a very fresh, lime-heavy rose with Angelica. And I love Angelica galbanum combination, but it just gives it this little bit of earthy green type feel with some saffron, ginger, orange blossom, a lot of fresh notes that come through, and musk and pine. So there's a lot of green notes and a lot of fresh notes, and sandalwood. There is frankincense, but you have to keep in mind that this is almost like a bubbly rose. I think the emoji I put next to it was like bubbles, you know? And so if you can imagine this bubbly rose, it turns slightly soapy with some vanilla in the base, but for the most part, it's a spicy floral fragrance that when I first smelled it, I thought, no way could I wear this as a guy. You know, that was my very first thought, is that this is too feminine leaning for me. And it's funny because the men's version of Lyric and the woman's version are almost like switched, because the women's version is more of a deeper, darker, vintage style rose, you know, something you would expect from the past. Whereas the men's version is the fresher, more floral, you know, not as deep, not as animalic, definitely nowhere near as animalic as Lyric Woman. And they kind of did this switch, you know, where you would expect the women's one to be in the men's bottle kind of thing. But Lyric Man is one of those fragrances that grew on me. I kept thinking about it and going back to it. And eventually I was like, I have to find a bottle. And I did. Very lucky to have a bottle. But yes, Amage Lyric Man is #1 on the niche list. And you know, you have to be a rose lover, because that is rose, rose, rose. There's other things, but go check out my review if you want a in-depth thought on Lyric. Okay, next on the list we have, probably interestingly enough, another fragrance that when I first smelled, I didn't like it. Actually, I blind bought it, gave it a couple wears, and I was like, I can't do it. I mean, I almost gave it away. I almost did the same thing I did with my mini of Lyric Man and gave it away. I almost just gave the bottle away. And I'm so glad I didn't, because this is another one that over time, you know, it's almost like your nose changes as time goes on. And that's not me sitting up here, you know, on my castle saying, oh, your nose hasn't changed, so you don't understand it. I'm just telling you the reason that I never sell things is because I learned very early on that what you smell and what you think of a fragrance today will be different tomorrow, will be different from a week or two, will be different from a year or two, or 5 or 10 years from now. Your thoughts on a fragrance change. It's just, especially as you grow, it's like almost, think about it like this. Every single scent you smell, your nose grows. You know, it's something new that it's learned, something new that it's smelled, something new that it's experienced. And so your thoughts about something a couple years ago will change. And this is exactly what happened with this fragrance. This is Royal Mayfair. Now, I know Creed discontinued this, the original one from 2009. It was originally called Windsor. And I actually have a comparison video on my channel between the original formulation of Windsor and Royal Mayfair. And they're very, very close. I wouldn't go pay $2,000 for a vintage flacon of Windsor or anything. It's not worth it, you know? But they re-released it in 2024, I believe, end of 24. And I have not smelled that re-release. So I don't know if Caring Beauty, who now owns Creed after they bought it from BlackRock, is keeping the formula very close, or if they've done some tweaks. That I don't know. If anyone can speak to that, leave it in the comments below. But this is gin, pine, and lime. So again, a very similar sort of idea, lime and rose, which is a very unique combination. Actually, these two might be one of the only two fragrances in my collection that I can think of off the top of my head that has that very lime heavy presence with rose. And here they've used both rose and tuberose. Okay, so it's rose and tuberose with eucalyptus, cedar, and orange. So I couldn't find any of the original marketing, but from memory, I remember them saying that the whole idea of Royal Mayfair is that it was supposed to be like a celebration of England's empire. So they took bits and pieces from all over the empire that England at one point owned or ruled over, subsidiaries of England, if you want to call it that. And so the eucalyptus came from one country, the cedar came from another, the orange came from another, the rose, the tuberose, the lime, you get the idea. And they kind of put it together to create Royal Mayfair. And Mayfair Street is sort of the very high-end shopping district of London. You know, when you have more money than sense kind of thing, you can go there and just blow thousands like it's just a couple bucks. But this scent really grew on me. At first, it has this medicinal quality that can remind you of sort of, sometimes when I originally got to know the scent, and part of the one of the things that really was hard for me to digest was this medicinal, almost like, you know, when someone's older and they have arthritis and they put, you know, like creams or something on their knuckles, or their joints, that is what kept coming back. There was this medicinal side of this that didn't smell like a fragrance at first. It smelled like some sort of a, you know, Bengay or, you know, one of those type of creams, you know, that you would put on, very, very medicinal. And that's because of the mixture of eucalyptus and tuberose. They both can give off this very medicinal type feeling. As I got to know the fragrance more and more, that bothered me less and less. And what ended up happening is it turned from a negative to a positive, because I said, I've never smelled anything that was smelled like this before. You know, this is so different from what you would expect. And it's funny because all the people who give Creed shit for being a brand that, you know, sells these very, very expensive fragrances that are just not unique, they're easy to wear, you know, that kind of thing that people give Creed a hard time for. This is the exact opposite of that. This is unique and different and taking a chance. And the rose note in here of many of the rose fragrances I'm going to talk about, this one, if you just focus on that rose note, it is heartbreakingly beautiful. Okay, this would be an absolute perfect Valentine's Day scent, and it's so unique. You know, if you wore this only on Valentine's Day, it would be like this association year in and year out, if you have enough fragrances where you can just wear, you know, one fragrance on a special occasion like that. But the rose note in here is beautiful. Check it out if you never smelled it. Royal Mayfair by Creed from 2009. Again, re-released, but I have not smelled the new one. Okay, next on the list, we are going to talk about probably the one fragrance on this list that is a pure rose soliflor, which is not necessarily true. I mean, there's some other notes in here that Luca Maffei blended in to make it give off that, you know, Rose de Taif type smell. But the idea of this is that it's supposed to smell like a rose, a specific type of rose, called the Taif rose, which is grown in Saudi Arabia, a little bit away from Mecca, if you will. And it's probably one of my all-time favorite roses because it has this very lemony, fresh, you know, tea-like quality. If you've ever seen the inside of a Taif rose, it has this sort of yellow, almost the color of the juice, you know? It has this sort of yellow, I don't know what the proper scientific term is, but the inside of the rose has these almost like nectar, pollen-looking things that shoot out of the rose, and they're yellow. And that yellow feeling, if you can imagine it, the sunniness, the freshness, it's so unbelievably beautiful. Taif rose is my all-time favorite rose. And so this is Rose de Taif from Paris Monte Carlo. Now, specifically, this is the extrait. And so this is a 2015 release. I think a couple years ago they released the Eau de Parfum, Rose de Taif. But the extrait specifically is the one that I'm talking about today. And I'm a big fan of this for what it is. It is expensive, unfortunately. It is still available in production. I don't know if you know, Paris Monte Carlo has any reformulation issues or anything like that. But I will tell you what, this is a very impressive fragrance. And it really smells like you are wearing rose oil, like you put on fresh rose oil. The geranium adds to that sort of freshness in the beginning. You know, geranium can have this slightly green, fresh type smell that smells like rose, and many perfumers use it to amplify rose because it's not as expensive. Rose oil is unbelievably expensive on its own. So there's Taif rose and Damask rose absolute. Those two roses complement each other very well, with the geranium on the top and this big note of lemon, the little bit of nutmeg and just a little bit of musk, and that's it. I mean, it literally smells like you are smearing rose oil on yourself. It is so beautiful, especially for a niche house like this. I'm not a big fan of Paris Monte Carlo, but I'll tell you what, this is one that I can definitely recommend. But it is, out of all of them, this is the one that smells the most like a rose soliflor, like you are just putting rose oil on yourself. So that is from 2015. And two more in the niche realm, and then we'll move to the artisanal. So it's funny because I reviewed all of them in the niche world except for the Paris Monte Carlo, and I've reviewed none of the designers. And so this next one on the list, there's also a full review on the channel. This is called Rose de Jamal, and probably one of the most beautiful rose fragrances I've ever smelled, just period. It has this, Moroccan Rose Absolute. And when I did the review, I showed some, unlike the roses that are in the thumbnail today, that deep, dark, mystical red, you know, like we're painting the roses red feeling of the roses that will be in the thumbnail today. When I showed the roses for Rose de Jamal, I specifically picked them out because I was going for that pink rose, and that's what it smells like. It doesn't smell like a deep, dark, rich red. It doesn't smell animalic like the designer roses from the 70s and 80s. It has this sort of, you know, pink, it smells like a pink rose, what I would imagine a pink rose to smell like. And there actually is a farmer named Jamal, and he actually is from Morocco, which makes the story even cooler. And they literally went to his farm and bought his rose oil. And so it is literally roses from Jamal. And if you'll notice, they used Moroccan geranium, Madagascan pink pepper, Moroccan mint. And so they tried to use these ingredients from Morocco to go with the Moroccan rose. It's such just a stunningly beautiful, all these different shades of pink, you know, come to mind as I'm smelling this. And again, for a rose lover, it's very, very hard in the niche realm to beat this, to beat something like Rose de Jamal. And if I was going to get a full bottle from Les Indemodables, this very well would be on that list. I think Oriental Velours would be at the top, but Rose de Jamal would be on that list. And then, finally, the last one, and this one came out at the end of 2022. I actually got a sample from my friend Eugene. It's called La Douleur Exquise, the exquisite pain. And as soon as I smelled it, I knew I needed a bottle, and I went and spent my own money and bought a bottle. And so La Douleur Exquise, The Exquisite Pain is floral, spicy, and many people, if they were doing this list, and this is why I think this individualism and knowing your reviewer, having a connection to your reviewer and understanding his or her taste makes a big difference. Many folks, while doing, if they put together a list like mine, they would probably put Portrait of a Lady on here. And I have a decan of Portrait of a Lady up here. I'm going to review it one of these days. Portrait of a Lady is a fantastic scent. Give me the Night any day, though. If I was going to take that style that Dominique Ropion made, I would much rather have the Night, because the Night has more of that rose oud thing, and you'll get some of that as we get to the artisanal space. Some of you may notice I've avoided the rose ouds in the designer and the niche realm so far. But we're going to get to that when we get to the artisanal space. But for me, I would personally take La Douleur Exquise over A Portrait of a Lady. That's my opinion. I think this is better for me, for my taste, because you sort of get all of these resins and slight Middle Eastern touches, you know, this frankincense and spice in the beginning. And the quality of the ingredients is outrageous. I mean, what he did with the brand Les Abstraits competes with the Frederic Malls, you know, straight head to head, 100% competes head to head. He got Antoine Lee to be the perfumer, who I think is one of the greatest perfumers still perfuming in current times in 2025. And they've used some of the highest quality ingredients from Remy's channel. Remy and Valerie own Les Indemodables. And so he actually offered to come on the channel, which I'm going to take him up on that. Once my life settles down a little bit, I'm going to take him up on that. And I would love to have him on the channel for a chat, because his ingredients are in some of my all-time favorite fragrances. And they're in this. And I would say this is probably my favorite rose patchouli. But there's actually a twist that happens as the fragrance continues to dry down. And that twist is that in the base, if you wait and you're patient, you know, and it goes through some transitions, the unbelievable spiciness, that almost slightly Middle Eastern opening, very resinous, you know, with the frankincense and the Turkish Rose Absolute and the Bulgarian Rose Absolute mixed together with a beautiful note of Iris Palladia. But later on, you get cumin, you get clove, and you get Castoreum Absolute. And that Castoreum Absolute in this fragrance is one of the only modern Castoreum Absolutes I've ever smelled that I think can compete with something like Vintage Antaeus. You know, the Castoreum level of something like Vintage Antaeus. And it's funny, when this came out, everyone was screaming, "Oh, Portrait of a Lady, Portrait of a Lady." Very first thing that popped into my head was Imitation Man by Amage, which I reviewed on the channel. And this also does something very similar. Goes in a little different direction. You can go check out the review, and you know, I talk about, you know, some of the differences here, but there's also a Castoreum note in the base here, and it's also one of the best. This and Epic Man are two of the best Castoreum notes from Amage that I've smelled, but this actually I think is even a higher quality than in Imitation Man. But La Douleur Exquise, if you're into rose patchoulis and you like something like Portrait of a Lady and you've never tried it, I would urge you to try this. I think it is fantastic. Top rose patchouli for me personally. If I was going to pick one rose patchouli to have in the collection, I would probably keep La Douleur Exquise. I think it's an unbelievable wear. And I think his trio of scents was a real home run for the brand. I can't wait to see what else the brand does next time. So, all right, so that's the 5 niche fragrances. So next on the list, we're going to do 5 artisanal fragrances. So these are the houses where it's like one guy owns the house. It's his hands doing the distilling of the fragrances, you know, the creation of the fragrances, the distilling of the ouds, or, you know, the roses or whatever it is. And so we've got 5. The first one is going to be actually the very first fragrance that Russian Adam made. And Russian Adam, interestingly enough, it's January 29th as I'm making this of 2025. February 1st, he has a new Attar collection coming out, which I cannot wait to smell. Cannot wait to smell his new Attar collection. But this was actually his very first fragrance, called Ottoman Empire. And I've reviewed this on the channel. You can check it out. You can see how little I have left. I'm like fuck. But Ottoman Empire is on that list of Aramis L'Adores that I want a full bottle of, and I just have not been able to source yet. There are 5 different Ottoman Empires, I believe, and they all use the same formula. I've smelled most of them. I can tell you they all smell so close that I wouldn't worry about paying, you know, don't pay big money just to get the first version like I have here. Get whatever you can get, in my opinion. But it's funny because when he came on the channel, he mentioned that when he first started doing perfume, that he didn't even know what a Chypre was or a Fougère was. He just began his love by doing distillations and selling oud at first, and then he figured he would try to mix some stuff together. And this was one of his very first creations. He calls it an extravagant of richness. That's why he named it Ottoman Empire, because he said it's like a huge thing, like the Ottoman Empire. And so you get Jamaican pepper, cardamom, pure rose oil from Afghanistan, Georgia and Bulgaria, Indian rose absolute, Thai white rose, which actually is going to show up. This white rose is going to show up in my next artisanal rose, and jasmine mixed with frangipani water, freshly co-distilled by Russian Adam. And then in the base, that's where you start to get the saffron, the different types of agar woods and vetivers and sandalwoods and all this stuff. But it is a rose oud, but it's a rose oud unlike I've ever smelled before, because this version of a rose oud, so when I reviewed it, I basically said that it was almost like the rose was like a trumpet, you know, triumphantly announcing the arrival of the oud on a red carpet. You know, the rose just comes in so beautifully at the beginning. And like I said, I would love a bottle of this one day. High on my wish list. Excuse me, a lot of real different types of ouds in here. As I said, oak moss, myrrh, amber resins, all this stuff. So it makes it this huge fragrance, and it is a huge fragrance. People will definitely notice you wearing this. Ottoman Empire by Aramis L'Adores is the first one. Okay, next on the list is a Sultan Pasha, and I've reviewed maybe 4 or 5 of these. I forget how many, but if you go back and watch my review, you'll see the level was like halfway, and you can see how much I've worn this. Now, I probably do over apply. I probably just swipe when all you need is like 1 drop of an attar, and I'm just swiping away. But I love this stuff. This one's called Insar Rose, and it's basically called Insar Rose because it is said to use a very rare Hindi oud that was personally distilled by Insar called Oud Yunus. Okay, so we get two big artisanal names shouted out here, Sultan Pasha and Insar in one. But this uses this white rose alba atto that I mentioned. In Ottoman Empire, it was Thai white rose. Here, it's rose alba atto, and it is unbelievable. Oh my God. And the thing about it is, you know, there's multiple types of roses in here. Persian rose atto, Bulgarian rose absolute, rose alba atto, as I said, tuberose absolute, mixed with this Mysore sandalwood and this rare Indian oud with real ambergris. And, you know, it's so... I heard some people compare or complain that it's too light. But the thing is you can smell that real Mysore sandalwood in the base. And if it was heavier, it would probably get blotted out, because Mysore sandalwood is very, very soft, gentle. You know, it has this spongy quality to it, this unbelievable sort of spongy quality. You know, imagine looking at a sponge and you can kind of see the little holes in it and you can squeeze it. That's how the proper Mysore sandalwood feels, so milky and soft. And these beautiful real rose oils sit on top of this Mysore sandalwood, ambergris, and that Indian oud, which is unlike any normal Indian oud you would have smelled. Insar Rose is one of my all-time favorite rose fragrances I think I've ever come across, and you can tell by how much I've worn it. And it was funny because at first I was like, I don't like this attar thing. I like spraying. Spraying is my thing. It's my you know, it's my routine. I'm a very routine person. And so I remember whenever I first started to wear attar, I was like, I don't like this. It fucks everything up. It ruins everything. And then here I am after a couple days of wearing it going, I don't want to go back to spraying. I want to continue to use the attar because they're so good. Well, I think Sultan Pasha is the king of attar, personally. But, okay, next on the list, this is the one, out of all of them, this is probably the least rosy. Rose is a component of this, but really, the way that Arthur Clayton Emmerich describes this fragrance as he says it's, imagine like a field of wildflowers. So imagine all these different flowers. Roses are just one of the many flowers that you see. And his fragrance, his 15 mils basically come like this. They come wrapped in the Jinx skunk logo here, which I think is a very interesting logo to choose. I really like it. And this one's called Api Apres. Api Apres. I'm probably butchering that, but basically this smells like, if you could imagine imagine going back to the 1930s and smelling like a vintage Guerlain that you've never smelled before. And there's a bunch of Guerlains from 100 years ago you just have never smelled or never even heard of. There's a ton of them. You know, there's so many old Guerlains that are on my wish list that I'll never smell. But this is supposed to be this scent of sweetly scented wildflowers and clover in the humid summer sun. Stone fruit and honey meld with both rich and dry woods and a musky masculine take on a spicy pollen perfume. A sprayable ode to the eastern honeybee. Api Apres is an updated and heavily reworked version of an early Patreon release, Api Serena, which I've never smelled before, but apparently he does these Patreon things where only his Patreon customers get a chance to buy it. So 15 mils, which is what this bottle is here, sold for $225. I believe it is sold out. But he is known to remake stuff later on that sells well as well. But this has this vintage Bulgarian rose otto in the heart, along with some Thai oud, Mysore sandalwoods, you know, real vintage Siberian deer musk, 12-year aged civet. And so on that side, there's a little bit of Civet de Nuit, the aged civet in here as well. You know, real white ambergris and this little honeyed pollen. This is supposed to smell like a pollinated flower field. You know, imagine like a honeybee going around and pollinating these different flowers. Very floral. You know, the animalics are there, but they melt into this vintage floral profile. I'll do a full review one of these days. It's on my list to review. I need to wear it more. I've only worn it twice. So I need to wear it more as my scent of the day. But so far, I really like it. I mean, it smells like a vintage Guerlain to me. So that is Api Apres by Jinx. And so 2 left. And this one, actually, I just wore to bed yesterday for the first time, but I'm taken by it. In fact, I think it might be one of his best creations so far. This is from the brand Kashti. So Divyam is the perfumer. So shout out to him. And check out the packaging. It's almost like this crocodile-looking box. I love the packaging that he sent this in. Very, very cool updated packaging he has. So the brand is Kashti, K-A-S-H-T-I. And they're another one of these Indian brands, which is kind of sprouted up. And, you know I talk a lot about Sherwood and stuff like that. Kashti is a brand that I haven't done too much work on the channel, but that's going to change, especially, and this is probably the fragrance that's going to change it. I loved what I smelled yesterday from this. I will tell you, I only wore it to bed, have not given it a full wear, but I was really taken with it since it's new, and you can still buy it because he does it very similar to how Russian Adam does his stuff, where there's a limited run. Once it's gone kind of thing. And I believe he has a website now, which is called KashtiFragrances.com. So K-A-S-H-T-I, KashtiFragrances.com. And you can't buy them on the website, interestingly enough. This could be something that Sherwood could do. They could create a website like this where you can at least inquire about it, but you can't buy it. You have to reach out to them directly. And so this is on there as well. And they talk a little bit about it. The ingredients are on the back. But one of the things that I really noticed was the quality of the roses. And there's a lot of different types of roses in here. There is, so here, I'll read you the note listing. Castoreum, Tabak, benzoin, myrrh, cypriol, popanax, hyraceum, patchouli, vetiver, aldehydes, geranium spices, tuberose, plumeria, rose otto, Turkish rose, Nagarar rose, which I'm not familiar with, neroli, mint, cardamom, Egyptian geranium, and Hindi oud. So the first 30 minutes, I was in heaven. I was like, this is hands down the absolute best thing he ever did. And as it continued to dry 20, 30, 45 minutes in, I noticed there was this very fresh, musky undertone coming through. Little bit of like bergamonte like feeling, and the sort of neroli can sometimes add this soapy quality to a fragrance, and I'm guessing that's what it was. It felt like, because there were so many naturals in there, they were really competing for space once that first 30 minutes, you know, continued to open up and the fragrance got into the deeper dry down. But man, I'll tell you what, that opening, I would just reapply this. It's so unbelievably beautiful. You know, the citruses later on maybe felt, I don't know how to describe it, maybe slightly plasticky in a way. I need to wear it more and give it more time, but I really feel like this is an unbelievable rose oud, very natural smelling, and I know he's a stickler with only using naturals, and sometimes that's a very hard thing to do. Very hard to make 100% natural perfume, which he did here. So, which all of his fragrances, I believe, are. So this one's called Rosette, or I guess it's Rosé. Probably not Rosette, but my Texan coming out there. But anyways, if you're interested, you can go to his website and inquire about it. He can tell you a little bit about it. Very exotic rose scent with the rose and the oud. Very rose prominent. You know, I really, really like that about it. Along with all the other stuff I mentioned. And it's slightly animalic. So imagine if it was something like Aramis 900, but done in a like artisanal style with the real hardcore ouds and animalic castoreum and stuff like that. And there is Taif rose in here too, my favorite type of rose. So anyways, I just thought I'd shout this out because he calls it a symphony of roses. And if you're looking for a good rose to wear on Valentine's, this could be one. Okay, finally, last one. My all-time favorite, if you know, you know, this is the king of ouds for me. And one day I will have a bottle. No matter what I have to do, I will have a bottle of this one day. It is Malik Alif, and I reviewed it off of this sample, and you can see I'm just cherishing my last drop because fuck me. Oh my God, man. They don't call this the king of Taif for nothing. There's a whole story behind it. You can check it out. If you're interested, go watch my review of Malik Alif. I go into the story, how they only used women to pick the petals, and they removed the petal from the actual, you know, stem and the bulb that holds the flower, because that can sometimes make it smell green. Or normally they just chop it and distill it. Here they pulled only the petals when they did the distillation, and it's something like 40%. So I think IFRA rules you can't have more than 5%. And brands will brag, oh, this has 2% real rose oil. This is 40%. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever smelled. And when I really started to realize that no matter how good the perfumer is, and there are some amazing perfumers out there. I talked about Antoine Lee and stuff like that, you know, with Les Indomables, and they are amazing. And they tell you what percentage of rose oil and all this stuff is. And it is amazing. It just can't compete with the real thing. It's like, you know, trying to compete with the beauty of the world. The real having, when you smell something like this, that, and if you've never smelled it, you can't roll your eyes until you've actually smelled it. You know, the beauty of something like Malik Alif was like a turning point in my fragrance journey. And this just highlights this. It's so unbelievable. I mean, I will have a bottle one day. So Malik Alif, basically rose, Indian oud, real natural musks as well. That's the other thing. It's like the trifecta. My favorite rose in huge quantities: saffron, amber, cyan benzoin, sandalwood, Indian oud, which I love, and then you add the real deer musk on top, and it's just like, if I was a king and I had an unlimited amount of funds, I would track down every single bottle of this and I would wear this as my signature scent. This would be my signature scent, Malik Alif. It would be an unbelievable Valentine's Day scent. So that's my top 15. 5 designers, 5 niche, 5 artisanal. I hope you loved the video setup. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody coming up. Appreciate everyone watching as always. Let me know what you think your Valentine's Day scent will be. Love you guys. Cheers. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.